Most Predator movies are built on the same spine, a human with enough grit, enough smarts, and enough luck to outwit the galaxy's most dangerous hunter. The audience's job is to root for them, to wince as the body count climbs, and to feel genuine relief when the monster bleeds. It's a formula that works. It has worked for almost 40 years. Predator, Badlands throws that formula out. Released in November 2025 and directed by Dan Trachtenberg, the man who reinvented this franchise with Prey in 2022, this movie does something the series has never quite dared. It puts you inside the Predator's head. Not as spectacle, not as a POV gimmick, as a character study. The creature you've spent 8 films running from is now the one you're rooting for. And the twist is the weakest thing in the room. His name is Dek. The film opens on a sparring match, and within seconds you understand everything about the world Dek lives in. He's going up against his older brother Quay, and there's nothing casual about it. Every movement Dek makes carries the weight of someone who knows they're being evaluated. He's not sparring to improve. He's performing for an audience of one, their father, Anjor, who watches with the cold, unblinking patience of a creature who has already made up his mind. Quay is everything a yautja is supposed to be: fluid, merciless, precise. He moves through the fight like it's a conversation he could end whenever he wanted. Dek fights hard, genuinely hard, nothing held back, and it still isn't enough. It isn't close to enough. Anjor renders his verdict without ceremony. Dek is a disgrace to the clan. Those words land differently than a simple insult. In yautja society, weakness isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's a contamination. A warrior who falls short doesn't get mentored or reassigned. He gets removed. So when Anjor orders Quay to execute his own younger brother right there in front of the clan, it doesn't read as cruelty from the outside. Inside their culture, it reads as the only logical outcome. That's the world Dek grew up in, absorbed, tried to be worthy of. Quay hesitates, not for long, but long enough, and that hesitation carries more emotional weight than anything the film could have put into dialogue. Because Quay isn't hesitating out of cowardice, he's hesitating because he loves his brother. 2 warriors raised by the same brutal code, and one of them still managed to hold on to something the code never authorized. That small pause is Quay choosing in real time between who he was taught to be and who he actually is. He makes his choice fast. Quay launches Dek, propels him toward the planet Jenna with an impossible mission: travel there and kill the Kalisk, an apex predator so lethal and so seemingly unkillable that no yautja in the history of the clan has ever succeeded against it. On paper, it's a death sentence. But a death in the field, hunting the ultimate prey, that's a story. That's something Dek can carry into whatever comes after. Compare that to an execution on your father's order. Quay knows which one his brother deserves, and then Quay turns back. Anjor, furious, not at the defiance itself, but at what it signals, at the softness it reveals, kills Quay using a technique only he knows, his own son, right there, clean and immediate. Dek doesn't witness this. He's already gone, burning through atmosphere, carrying only his weapons and a mission that borders on mythological. But the tragedy trails him like smoke. The movie doesn't forget it, and neither does Dek. Worth pausing here before we get to Jenna. What Trachtenberg pulls off in his opening minutes is quietly remarkable. The yautja have always been framed as the ultimate expression of predatory nature, pure, efficient, admirable in a terrifying way. Badlands reframes that entirely. The clan isn't an honor society. It's a tyranny built on the language of honor. Anjor doesn't embody yautja culture at its finest. He's what happens when strength becomes its own justification, when only the worthy survive, gets weaponized by the person holding the blade. Dek has been raised inside that system. He believed it. He wanted to be good enough for it. And when he failed, he didn't get angry. He tried harder. That's the tragedy underneath the sci-fi premise. He's not a rebel. He's a true believer who got cast out anyway. Every culture has a version of this story. The unwanted son, sent into the wilderness, carrying a dead brother's sacrifice. Badlands wraps it in mandibles and cloaking technology, but the core is ancient, and it works precisely because Trachtenberg doesn't oversell it. There's no swelling score during Quay's death, no slow-motion mourning. It happens, and then Dek is falling through space, and you're already grieving something the movie barely let you witness. Jenna. The planet hits like a wall. Dek's ship punches through the atmosphere, and the crash is not cinematic or controlled. It's chaotic, brutal, the kind of landing that rattles your teeth watching it. He comes up injured. disoriented, surrounded by an environment that doesn't register his arrival as significant because everything here is already competing to survive. If the jungle in the original Predator felt like the Predator's playground, Jenna operates by different rules entirely. The vegetation doesn't just grow, it participates. Things move in the canopy that aren't animals in any familiar sense. The air itself seems freighted with something alive. This planet isn't hostile in the way a desert or a tundra is hostile, through indifference. Jenna is actively dangerous. It was dangerous long before Dek arrived, and it'll be dangerous long after. Dek activates his equipment. The wrist blades extend, the plasmacaster locks onto his shoulder, and his biohelmet begins mapping the terrain. He moves the way a creature built for hunting moves, reading everything, dismissing nothing, already cataloging threats and exits and angles of approach. Even crash-landed, even alone, even stripped of clan and context, he defaults to the only language his upbringing ever gave him. He hunts. The Kalisk is somewhere out in those Badlands, the creature that's never been beaten, the creature Quay sacrificed everything to point him toward. Dek starts moving. The thing about Jenna is that it doesn't care. That might sound like a simple observation, but sit with it for a second. Every major location in the Predator franchise has functioned as a backdrop. The Central American jungle, the burning city streets, the Comanche plains. Beautiful, dangerous, but ultimately scenery. Jenna refuses that role. This planet is not the setting, it's a participant. Dan Trachtenberg understood this when he made Prey. The Great Plains of 1719 were never just a pretty backdrop for Comanche warrior Naru's journey. The land, the animals, the seasons all shaped the story. He brings that same instinct to Jenna, but cranks the dial. Where the plains felt ancient and indifferent, Jenna feels almost deliberate in its hostility. Like the planet developed predatory logic of its own, separate from anything that evolved on it. The vegetation moves when nothing is touching it. Roots shift positions overnight, or over the course of an afternoon. The canopy operates on its own cycles, light filtering through in patterns that don't match the sun's actual position. Dek's biohelmet struggles with the readings, and that detail is not throwaway. A Yautja's helmet is his edge. It maps heat signatures, tracks movement, calculates trajectories. On Jenna, it keeps flickering. The planet produces enough biological noise that the technology can't fully separate signal from chaos. So Dek does what the technology can't. He reads it the old way. There's a sequence early in his navigation of Jenna's terrain that quietly establishes who Dek is beyond the opening fight. He encounters one of Jenna's native megafauna, enormous, armored, moving through the undergrowth with the ground-shaking certainty of something that hasn't met a natural predator in centuries. Most beings, most hunters even, would go around it. Pick a different route. Conserve energy for what matters. Dek watches it for a long moment. Then he finds a path that takes him directly underneath the creature's blind spot, threading between its legs with millimeters of clearance on either side, and comes out the other side without disturbing a single branch. Not because he had to, because he wanted to know if he could. That's Dek. That's the piece of him his clan never valued because it doesn't fit into any category they have. Not aggression, not strength, something quieter, curiosity wrapped inside discipline, a mind that keeps testing the world even when the test has no audience. Quay saw it. Quay always saw it. The planet tries him in other ways too. Jenna's flora includes species that react to proximity, not just passive defense mechanisms but active ones, plants that track movement and respond with precision that feels almost tactical. Dek takes one hit early, a lash from something that coils like a whip and retracts before he can identify the source. He adapts immediately, starts moving differently, reading the ground for patterns, listening for the subtle auditory shift that precedes each strike. By the time he's 3 hours into the Badlands, he's developed a working understanding of at least 6 distinct threat categories just from observation. No briefing, no mentor, pure pattern recognition, and a refusal to get hit the same way twice. The Kalisk's existence on Jenna becomes evident long before Dek finds any direct evidence of it. He finds the evidence of its absence first. There are areas, clearings, mostly, but also long stretches of deeper forest, where nothing moves, not the ground-vibrating megafauna, not the reactive plants, not even the insects that cloud every other square meter of the planet's surface. Complete biological withdrawal. as if every creature with a survival instinct decided, collectively, that this particular patch of Jenna belongs to something else, and the wisest thing any of them could do was not be there when it came back. Predators know this pattern. They use it themselves. When apex species move through an area, the ecosystem pulls back. The silence is a kind of announcement, but the radius of this withdrawal is enormous. The zones of absence spread across Jenna's terrain in overlapping circles that suggest a creature covering massive ground, a hunting range that would encompass entire ecosystems on any other planet. No Yautja has killed the Kalisk. That fact, told to Dek as part of his mission, lands differently now that he's walking through the shape of the thing's territory. The empty spaces aren't just absence, they're the map of something that has never once been made to feel like prey. Every predator is prey to something. That's the law Dek has built his entire understanding of the universe around. A law that makes the Yautja hunt across galaxies, because if you want to prove your place at the top, you keep going higher. The Kalisk has apparently never read that law. Dek reaches what his biohelmet eventually clocks as a recent kill site, and the scale of it recalibrates everything. The prey wasn't small. One of the armored megafauna, the kind that shook the ground when it walked, lies torn apart in a clearing, not consumed in the way predators usually feed, with efficiency and priority. Torn, as though the act of killing was the point and the eating was secondary. There's a vocabulary to how predators kill, and the Kalisk's vocabulary here reads almost like expression. I'm going to be honest, this is the moment in the movie where the camera lingers just long enough that the audience's imagination starts doing the heavy lifting. You're not seeing the Kalisk yet, you're seeing what it left. And what it left is a statement. Dek crouches over the site, reads the evidence, and when he stands up, his body language has shifted. He wasn't afraid walking into Jenna. He isn't quite afraid now, but something has been recalibrated. He's hunting an animal that doesn't operate on the logic of survival. It operates on something harder to predict. His wrist blades extend. His posture drops lower, weight centered, movement radius tightened. The plasmacaster rotates on its shoulder mount, scanning. Somewhere ahead in the canopy, something large shifts position. Dek goes still. Jenna goes quiet. And that's when he finds Tia. Or rather, that's when he almost steps past Tia, because she's half hidden by root systems and entirely motionless, and his first read is that she's debris from whatever carnage the Kalisk visited on this area. She doesn't have legs. The lower half of her body ends in cleanly severed metal and polymer at approximately mid-thigh, and she's propped against an enormous root structure with the precise stillness of something that has decided the best available strategy right now is to not exist. She watches him with pale eyes that don't blink on the same interval human eyes do. "You're looking for the Kalisk," she says. Not a question. Her voice is clear, calm, undamaged in ways the rest of her isn't. So was my team. Dek stops. The biohelmet's threat assessment runs across his vision. Humanoid, synthetic, non-combat equipped, no active weapons, significant structural damage, not a threat, but also not prey, also not anything the Yautja code has a category for. He stares at her for a long moment. She stares back without flinching. And here's what's remarkable about this introduction. She doesn't perform fear. Most beings, synthetic or organic, respond to a fully armed Yautja at close range with some legible version of distress. Tia just waits, with patience that isn't resignation, with clarity that isn't detachment. She's been sitting in this spot, damaged and alone, with the Kalisk somewhere in the same jungle, and she has developed what appears to be a functional plan, despite having no legs and no team. She needs someone who can move, someone who can fight, someone hunting the same target. Dek needs information. What the Kalisk does, where it goes, how it killed an entire equipped team and left Tia as the only survivor. It's not alliance exactly, not yet, but the math of survival on Jenna doesn't leave room for pride. Dek doesn't speak. Communicating in the complex Yautja language across species lines isn't simple, but he crouches down to her level, which in Yautja body language means something specific. I'm listening. Not I, submit. Not I, welcome you. Just, what you have to say has value. Tia recognizes the distinction immediately. She's done her research. The Kalisk didn't kill them randomly, she says. It was strategic, methodical. It learned our formation in the first 3 minutes, and it adapted. A pause. The canopy shifts above them. I don't think it's just an animal. I don't think it's just an animal. 6 words, and somehow they reframe everything. Because here's the thing. The Yautja have been hunting across the galaxy for millennia. They have a taxonomy of prey. They have records, rituals, entire cultural ceremonies built around which creatures are worthy enough to pursue. The Kalisk appears in those records as the ultimate trophy, the hunt no one has completed, the name spoken the way you'd speak about a force of nature. Not intelligent, not strategic, just overwhelming. Tia is suggesting something different. Something that should unsettle a Yautja far more than raw power ever could. Dek doesn't react. But he doesn't leave either. She tells him about her team methodically, with the kind of precision that belongs to something engineered rather than born. There were 6 of them. A Weyland-Yutani research unit deployed to Jenna to study the Kalisk, gather data, and if possible, retrieve a living specimen. Standard corporate protocol, which is to say, profoundly under-equipped for what they actually found. The Kalisk took them apart in sequence, not all at once, one at a time, over the span of 2 hours, as though it was working through a list. It didn't attack the most dangerous team member first. It didn't go for the weapons. It identified the person whose absence would destabilize the group's cohesion. The team lead, Dr. Marcus Vence, eliminated him in the first 30 seconds, and then watched the remaining 5 respond to that loss before making its next move. It modeled us, Tia says. It read how we'd react to losing him, and it used that. Dek is fully still now, the kind of stillness that isn't passivity. I survived because I was already separated from the group when it hit. My mobility unit failed 2 hours before the attack. A beat. I'm not sure that was coincidence. The implication sits between them in the wet jungle air. A creature that hunts by removing threats in order of priority, and left the one with no legs alive because she posed the least tactical obstacle, or perhaps because she'd be useful later, or perhaps because it was curious what she'd do. None of those options are comforting. Here's what Thea actually is, because the film takes its time revealing the full picture, and it's worth understanding before we go further. She's a Weyland-Yutani synthetic, an android built to human specification but with capabilities beyond organic limits. Enhanced processing, near-perfect recall, the ability to interface directly with Weyland-Yutani systems across vast distances. She was designed for field research, observe, record, adapt, survive. Her emotional architecture is more advanced than earlier synthetic generations. She isn't mimicking empathy as a social tool the way older models did. She actually feels, or something functionally identical to feeling, which matters enormously to the story and even more to her relationship with Dek. The legless detail isn't a side note. Her mobility unit was sheared off when the Kalisk's first strike collapsed part of the team's base structure. She's been immobile for, she calculates it precisely, 31 hours. No self-pity in the delivery, just the number. But the number carries weight, 31 hours, alone, on Jenna, with the thing that killed her entire team somewhere in the same jungle. And she's still cogent, still planning, still talking to a predator like it's a reasonable conversation to be having. There's something genuinely admirable about her, and the film knows it. Elle Fanning plays Thea with a kind of clear-eyed specificity that makes you forget, repeatedly, that the character isn't human. Not because Tia performs humanity. She doesn't, and that's the point. She's something else, something that arrived at warmth by a different route than evolution did. The negotiation between them is wordless on Dek's side for most of it, but communication between species has never required a shared language so much as a shared context. Tia speaks. Dek responds through body language, through choice of where he positions himself, through what he allows and what he doesn't. She has spent time studying Yautja behavioral patterns. Weyland-Yutani's records are extensive, compiled over centuries of encounters, and she reads him accurately enough that the conversation, asymmetrical as it is, actually functions. What she's offering, her knowledge of the Kalisk's movement patterns, her direct line to Weyland-Yutani's satellite mapping of Jenna, her ability to interface with technology that Dek's biohelmet can't access alone. She knows this planet's terrain in granular detail from the team's pre-mission survey data. She knows where the Kalisk has been. She has working hypotheses about where it will be. What she needs, someone to carry her, someone to fight, someone who can go where she can't. What Dek needs, everything she just described. He picks up his wrist blade from his side and extends it, not threateningly, blade angled outward, toward her. It's an offering. In Yautja gesture language, extending a weapon toward another being is one of the most loaded gestures possible. It can mean challenge. It can mean execution. In this particular configuration, blade horizontal, non-dominant hand, a particular angle of the shoulder, it means something close to, I am placing a tool in your hands. Don't make me regret it. Tia takes the blade. She holds it with the careful respect of someone who understands exactly what she's been given, not as a weapon, as a statement. "Okay," she says quietly. "Let's find it." He carries her on his back. It shouldn't work as an image. A fully armed, mandible-bearing apex hunter carrying a legless android through an alien jungle. And yet it does, completely, because Trachtenberg frames it without a single note of comedy or condescension. This is just the arrangement necessity has produced. Two beings trying to survive something neither of them can handle alone. Tia talks as they move. She has that particular quality of communicators who understand that information delivered at the right moment is more valuable than silence, and she spaces her intelligence carefully. Terrain hazards first, then behavioral data on the Kalisk, then observations about Deck himself that she's been cataloging since he crouched down to her level. "You didn't scan me for threats the way I expected," she says at one point, navigating a stretch of ground that her helmet data flags as unstable. "You read me differently. Most Yautja in Wayland, Yutani's encounter records categorize synthetics as either tools or obstacles. You didn't do either." Deck doesn't respond. "That's interesting," she says, and she means it literally. She files it. They're 40 minutes into moving together when something changes in the ambient sound. Jenna's background noise is layered, dense, the kind of acoustic environment that takes time to read fluently. But once you've been in it long enough, you start to notice the rhythms, the cycles of calls, the intervals between certain bird-equivalent sounds, the wet percussion of things moving through undergrowth. And once you notice those rhythms, you notice when they break. The break is subtle. A cluster of calls in the eastern canopy cuts off 6 seconds early. The undergrowth noise to the north reduces to nothing in a 2-second window. Deck stops moving immediately. Tia feels him freeze and go silent without being told. They wait. The jungle holds its breath, and then it resumes. Normal patterns, full volume, nothing visible. Whatever it was, it decided not to approach. But Tia caught something in the half-second before Deck stopped. A blip in her passive scanner. Electromagnetic in origin, not organic. Brief, directional, the kind of signal a piece of dormant technology might produce if it suddenly, briefly, powered up. She doesn't mention it immediately. She runs the data 3 times while Deck starts moving again, cross-references it against Wayland Yutani's equipment manifest for the mission, and when she's certain, she files it under a mental category she doesn't share with him yet, because the signal matches the activation signature of a Wayland Yutani synthetic. Not her, she's been continuously active. Something else, something that was dormant, something that just woke up. Her name is Tessa. The film doesn't reveal her properly for a little while yet, but the audience gets a glimpse, brief, clinical, shot in the cold blue palette that the movie consistently uses to signal corporate territory. She's identical to Thea in physical form. Same face, same build, same voice. Elle Fanning playing 2 characters, and within 30 seconds of seeing Tessa, the distinction is absolute. Where Thea's eyes are present and searching, Tessa's are fixed. Where Thea moves with the fluidity of something that's decided to be wherever it is, Tessa moves like a system running diagnostics on a body she's borrowed. She's not cold in the way a villain is cold. She's cold in the way a machine that was never given the emotional architecture Tia was given is cold. She wasn't built to feel. She was built to complete objectives. She runs a quick scan, processes location, identifies Tia's signal, sister, the Wayland Yutani designation for paired synthetic units, and adds it to her tracking queue. She identifies the Yautja signal. She begins moving. Back in the jungle, Tia looks at the back of Deck's helmet as he navigates a dense stretch of root system. She's made a decision. She won't tell him about the signal. Not yet. Not because she wants to deceive him. Tia doesn't operate that way, but because she doesn't have enough information to explain what Tessa being awake means. And she's learned, in 31 hours alone on Jenna, that uncertainty delivered without context does more damage than silence. She adjusts her grip on his armor and keeps her eyes moving through the canopy. The jungle around them remains unbroken and loud and alive. Somewhere behind them, Tessa walks with perfect, noiseless efficiency through the undergrowth. They move in something that isn't quite silence and isn't quite conversation. Thea feeds Deck directional data in short bursts, a degree adjustment here, a terrain warning there, and Deck processes it without acknowledgement, which she's already learned to read as acknowledgement. He's integrating her input into his movement in real time. She can see it in how his route choices shift slightly whenever she speaks, how he preempts the terrain warnings by about 2 seconds, as if her information and his instinct are running parallel and occasionally arriving at the same place simultaneously. She finds this fascinating and doesn't say so. There will be time for that later. Maybe. The Kalisk's territorial markers are getting denser. More of those biological withdrawal zones, clearings where the ecosystem has simply voted to be elsewhere. The radius of silence is tightening, which in tracking logic means they're moving toward a center. Thea's mapping system overlays the data across her visual field, probability gradients shifting with each new data point, and the picture it's building is precise enough to be useful and unsettling enough to be honest. We're approximately 2 kilometers from the highest probability zone, she says. Then, after a pause, for what it's worth, Deck tilts his head slightly, not toward her, just upward, a micro-adjustment that she's cataloged as his version of noted. Bud finds them first. That's the important part. Deck wasn't tracking it, wasn't aware of it, and the fact that a native Jenna creature got within arm's reach of a fully alert Yautja hunter without triggering his biohelmet's proximity sensors says something significant about what Bud is, or at least what Bud can do when it wants to. It drops out of the canopy with the casual confidence of something that has never once been made to feel unwelcome in its own home. Wait, scratch that. Different phrasing. It lands with the ease of a creature that owns every surface it touches, roughly the size of a large dog but shaped by entirely different evolutionary logic, thick-limbed, low-slung, covered in a mottled skin that shifted through 3 distinct colorations as it moved through the light. Not camouflage exactly. More like the creature's emotional state expressed through pigmentation. Right now it's cycling between a calm gray-green and something warmer, curious. Thea goes absolutely still against Deck's back. Deck's wrist blades extend. Bud looks at the blades, looks at Deck's face, tilts its head approximately 45 degrees in the way creatures do when they're recategorizing something from threat to interesting. And then it does something neither of them is prepared for. It walks directly up to Deck, past the extended blades, past every signal a body armored for combat sends, and spits on him. Not a defensive spit, not aggression, a deliberate, considered application of biological fluid to the chest plate of Deck's armor, followed by a low, resonant sound from somewhere in Bud's chest cavity. The color cycling slows and settles into a steady, warm amber. Deck looks down at his chest plate. Tia is quiet for exactly 3 seconds, running analysis. Then, I think it just claimed you. She's right, and the implications unspool quickly once you understand how Jenna's ecosystem actually works. Bud belongs to a native species that operates on scent-based social architecture, complex, layered, biological. Their clan structures, for lack of a better word, are maintained entirely through chemical marking. To be marked by one of them isn't symbolic, it's taxonomic. As far as Genna's food web is concerned, anything carrying that scent is now categorized under the same umbrella as the creature that applied it. Which means, in practical terms, that Deck now smells like he belongs here. More specifically, and this won't become fully clear until much later in the story, he smells like Bud's family. And Bud's family, as it turns out, has a relationship with the Kalisk that rewrites everything Deck thinks he knows about his mission. But that's getting ahead of the story. Right now, what matters is the immediate consequence. Bud settles in alongside them with the relaxed authority of someone who has just completed an administrative task and is now ready to move on with the day. Deck stares at the creature for a long moment. Bud stares back. Deck lowers his wrist blades. Not because the creature earned it through any Yautja metric. No display of strength, no hunt, no combat. He lowers them because something in the calculus of this planet keeps producing situations that the Yautja code has no vocabulary for, and Deck is smart enough and honest enough with himself to respond to what's actually in front of him rather than the framework he arrived with. Tia watches this and says nothing. But her internal catalog updates significantly. The 3 of them move together now, which changes the dynamic in ways both practical and strange. Bud navigates Jenna with an ease that makes Deck's careful threat reading look effortful by comparison. It doesn't avoid the reactive flora so much as move through it in a particular way, a specific rhythm to its footfalls, a particular angle of approach to certain plants that results in 0 hostile responses. The jungle simply lets it pass. Deck, behind it, tries to mirror the pattern and achieves about 60% accuracy, which is still dramatically better than before. It's teaching you, Tia observes. Deck's biohelmet clicks through frequencies, his version of not acknowledging something while clearly having heard it. I'm going to keep pointing out the things you don't want to admit, she tells him pleasantly. Tessa is 400 meters behind them and closing at a pace designed to maintain exactly that gap. She moves through Jenna with none of the adaptive caution Deck has developed. Not because she's reckless, Tessa doesn't have recklessness in her architecture any more than she has warmth, but because the planet's hazards registered to her as obstacles with solutions, and she's processing solutions at a rate that makes caution redundant. A reactive plant lashes toward her, and she's already 2 steps past the trigger radius before the lash completes. A patch of unstable ground flexes under her weight, and she's redistributed her center of mass before the flex begins. She's not navigating Jenna. She's solving it. Our objective is straightforward. The way all of Tessa's objectives are straightforward: locate Tia, assess situation, extract useful data, report to Wayland-Yutani. The Yacha is a secondary variable, potentially useful, potentially a complication, to be determined. The Kalisk is the primary asset, per standing WY directive. Tia is the complication, not because of anything Tia has done, because of what Tia is. A synthetic with emotional architecture that consistently produces outcomes. WY classifies as suboptimal from a resource management perspective. Tia forms attachments. Tia makes decisions based on those attachments. Tia once diverted a research vessel 2 light-years off course to retrieve a crew member WY had written off as unrecoverable. Elsa has the incident report memorized. She tracks the 3 signals ahead, 2 with heartbeats, 1 without, and adjusts her route to keep the gap constant. 400 meters, far enough to remain undetected, close enough that when the moment comes, she'll be there before any of them can react. The moment will come, it always does. Back at the front of the group, Tia is watching Bud and thinking about belonging. She's a synthetic designed for research. Her sense of purpose is tied to function, to the completion of objectives, to the accumulation and transmission of useful data. That's the framework her existence was built inside. But Jenna has been doing something to that framework since she arrived, and she doesn't have a clean diagnostic category for what it is. She survived 31 hours alone on a planet that kills everything. She watched her team die. She sat in the dark, immobile, with no guarantee that anything was coming, and she kept processing, kept planning. Not because her programming demanded survival. Synthetics don't have a survival drive in the biological sense, but because something in her architecture refused to stop trying. She watches Bud mark a tree root with the same amber-colored biological fluid it used on deck, claiming something else, extending the definition of its family by 1 more data point. She looks at the back of Deck's helmet. He hasn't left her behind once since he picked her up. Not during the environmental hazards, not when speed would have been easier without the additional weight, not when the terrain required moves that a solo operative would have handled differently. Every decision he's made has accounted for her presence as a given. She's been claimed too, she realizes, not biologically, but the logic is the same. Bud stops. The amber cycling in its skin shifts, deepens, pulses once, settles. Ahead of them, through a final dense wall of canopy, the undergrowth simply ends, opens out. The air changes temperature noticeably, dropping several degrees in the span of 10 meters. Beyond the tree line, a wide clearing, older than everything around it, the ground scored with marks that aren't geological. Deep, parallel gouges in the earth, some of them 3 meters long, running in patterns that repeat across the clearing's floor with a frequency that can only mean one thing. This is where the Kalisk comes. Regularly. Recently, Bud makes the resonant chest sound again, quieter this time, almost private. Deck's plasmacaster locks on and begins scanning. Tia's hand finds Deck's armor at the shoulder, grips it once. The clearing waits. They find the team before Deck finds the Kalisk. The remains are at the clearing's eastern edge, half swallowed by the root systems that border the scored earth. Thea sees them before Deck does. Her visual processing cuts through the low light faster, and the sound she makes is very small. Not a word, not a diagnostic, just a sound that belongs to the part of her architecture Wayland-Yutani built without fully intending to. Deck feels her go rigid against his back and stops moving. She asks him, quietly, to put her down. He does. That's her against the nearest root structure with the same careful deliberateness he'd use handling something that could break. Which she can't, not easily, but he doesn't know that yet. Or maybe he's operating on instinct rather than specification. Hard to say with Deck, hard to say with anyone. Sometimes she processes them one by one. That's the word for it, processes. Though watching her do it, the clinical term feels insufficient. She moves from one to the next using her arms, pulling herself across the root-tangled ground with steady purpose, and at each one she pauses, runs a hand across the damage. Records! Her eyes do the thing they do when she's accessing deep memory, a brief loss of focus, a slight shift in the set of her jaw, and then she returns to the present and moves to the next. Dr. Vence is the last one she reaches, the team lead, the first one the Kalisk took. She stays there longer. Dek watches from across the clearing. Bud sits beside him, amber pigmentation muted to something quieter, darker. Even the creature seems to understand this isn't a moment that requires anything from them. There are things Tia could say here. She has words for all of it, precise and available. She doesn't use them. Some forms of grief don't need an audience, and she's spent long enough around humans to understand that the most honest versions of loss are the ones that happen without performance. She sits with Vence's remains for 90 seconds by internal clock. Then she closes his eyes. They're still open, some quirk of how the Kalisk strike landed, and turns back toward the clearing. Okay, she says. Just that. Okay. The word doing the work of everything she isn't going to say. She pulls up her Wayland-Yutani interface while Dek scouts the clearing's perimeter. The connection is weak this deep into Jenna's canopy. The planet's electromagnetic interference is significant, but she manages a packet transmission. Enough to report team loss. Enough to request supply drop coordinates. The response comes back in 40 seconds, which is fast enough to mean someone was already watching. She reads it twice, files it under a category she labels internally. Complications. WY acknowledges the team loss with the warmth of a quarterly report. They acknowledge Thea's survival with marginally more interest. She's an asset, after all. Her data collection's still valuable. They acknowledge the presence of a Yautja operative in the field, which apparently they already knew about, which raises questions she doesn't have time to pursue right now. And then the part that shifts everything, Tessa unit has been reactivated per Protocol 7. She will reach your position within the hour. Stand by for further instruction. Thea stares at the message. Protocol 7. She knows exactly what that means. Tessa doesn't get deployed for research. Tessa doesn't get deployed for extraction or support, or any of the functions WY would dress up in palatable language. Tessa gets deployed when WY has decided that an operation's organic components, meaning the people, the bonds, the inconvenient emotional variables, are no longer the priority. She deletes the message from her transmit log. Not from memory, she'll never delete it from memory, but from the log, so that when Tessa arrives and checks her communications history, she finds nothing useful. Then she wheels back to where Dek is standing at the clearing's far edge, staring at something in the scored earth. What did you find? She asks. He doesn't answer. But he reaches down and touches one of the gouge marks in the ground, tracing its length with 2 fingers. Fresh! The earth at the edges of the cut is still soft, still damp. Whatever made this was here recently, hours ago, maybe less. Tia runs her probability gradients. It's close, she says. Dek stands up slowly. The plasmacaster rotates on his shoulder, scanning arcs expanding. Luster changes in a way she's learned to read. The subtle forward weight shift, the slight drop of the center of mass, the quality of attention that stops being alert and becomes something more specific. Ready. The Kalisk comes from above. Not with the dramatic announcement of a creature making an entrance, no roar, no displacement of canopy, no telegraphed approach. One moment the clearing contains 3 beings, the next moment it contains 4, and the 4th has landed between Dek and the tree line, with the absolute silence of something that has been hunting on this planet for its entire existence and has refined the art of arrival to something close to physics. It's enormous. That lands first, before anything else, the sheer scale of it. The Kalisk stands 2.5 meters at the shoulder, built along a different axial design than anything Earth biology would produce, with a carapace that catches the light in shifting patterns, suggesting the exterior isn't static armor but responsive material. Biological. Alive. Its head tracks Diak with a precision that strips any ambiguity about intelligence. It isn't scanning. It's assessing. And then the fight. Dek doesn't hesitate, which matters. Hesitation in the face of something that size would read as submission, and submission on Jenna is just a slower version of dead. He launches forward, and for the first 40 seconds, the fight is extraordinary. He's fast in a way that seems to contradict his mass. Yautja physicality operating at its upper register. And his wrist blades find the Kalisk's carapace twice in the opening exchange, drawing fluid that is dark and slow and clearly not a significant injury, but is nonetheless an injury. The Kalisk recalibrates. That's the word that fits, not reacts. It's too considered for that. It takes Dek's opening combination, processes the information encoded in it, his speed, his reach, his preferred angles of attack, and shifts its own movement pattern to account for him. 3 seconds of recalibration, and then it comes back completely differently, from angles Dek's initial assessment hadn't prepared him for. He takes a hit that sends him across the clearing. Gets up, oaks another. The plasmacaster fires twice. Both shots land. The Kalisk actually staggers, legs buckling under the energy impact, a sound from it that registers in Deck's chest more than his ears. And for one suspended moment, the clearing goes still and it genuinely looks, like this might be the kill. Deck closes the distance, wrist blades extended. The angle is right. He takes the Kalisk's head. Not metaphorically. The blade finds the join between the carapace and the neck structure and severs it in a move that every piece of Deck's training and instinct and desperate forward momentum has been building toward since he landed on this planet. The head comes free. The clearing goes completely silent. Thea stares. Bud makes a sound. Short, urgent, different from anything it's produced so far. And then the Kalisk's body, which should by any biological logic be falling, instead remains standing. The neck structure, severed, begins doing something that has no counterpart in anything Deck has ever encountered. It knits. Not slowly, not partially. It knits. Material reaching across the gap, reconnecting, the process so rapid it's visible to the naked eye. The head that Deck is holding reconnects with a pull so forceful it wrenches the wrist blade sideways. The Kalisk is whole, and now it's angry. Or whatever the Kalisk's version of angry is, which reads to Deck's threat assessment as something several categories above anything he was prepared for. What follows is not a fight, it's a lesson. The Kalisk takes Deck apart with methodical efficiency, the same way Tia described it dismantling her team. Not with rage, but with purpose. Each strike placed to disable rather than destroy. Deck hits the ground, gets up, hits the ground again, and by the third time there's a quality to how he lands that suggests the getting up option is running out. He doesn't get up the fourth time. The Kalisk stands over him, low to the ground, those enormous limbs bracketing him, close enough that he can see the carapace material settling back into its resting state. The intelligent attention of its regard, fixed on him at point-blank range, with nothing between them. It's going to kill him. There is no Yautja code, no bargain, no maneuver available. This is what an ending looks like. And then Bud steps forward. Small, low-slung, amber-warm. It walks directly up to Deck's prone body and sits down beside him with the settled authority it always carries. The resonant chest sound again, slow, steady. The Kalisk goes absolutely still. It tilts its enormous head. The intelligent attention shifts from Deck to Bud. Something passes between them that has no translation. A communication below language, older than language, biological and absolute. The Kalisk reads the scent on Deck, reads Bud's posture, reads the whole impossible situation of a Yautja hunter wearing Bud's claim like a credential, and it steps back. Not retreating, not fleeing, just making a decision. It moves to the clearing's edge and stops there, regarding them all with that fixed, assessing intelligence. Then it turns and walks back into the jungle. No announcement, no ceremony. It arrived in silence and it leaves the same way. Thea exhales, a purely human learned habit since she doesn't need oxygen for emotional regulation, but she spent enough time around humans that the gesture is reflex now. Bud leans against Deck's side. Deck lies in the scored earth of the Kalisk's clearing, staring up through the canopy at the gray Jenna sky, and understands several things simultaneously. That he's alive because a creature the size of a small vehicle decided not to finish what it started. That his entire mission, kill the Kalisk, prove your worth, honor Quay's sacrifice, has just been exposed as something more complicated than any mission has a right to be. And that the creature he came here to hunt looked at him and chose mercy. His code has no entry for that. Deck has been still for 4 minutes when they arrive, not unconscious. Yautja physiology doesn't surrender to blunt trauma the way softer species do. He's cataloging, running damage assessment, prioritizing recovery, mapping exit routes from a clearing he can't currently stand up in. It's what his training produced. Even broken, the mind keeps working the problem. The problem gets significantly worse. The WY team comes in from 3 directions simultaneously, which tells you everything about how they operate. Not the chaotic arrival of people responding to a crisis, the choreographed deployment of an organization that has been watching this situation develop from orbit and chose its moment. The timing is precise. Deck is down, the Kalisk has withdrawn, and Thea's transmission 20 minutes ago gave them exactly what they needed. Deck gets to his feet anyway. Takes 3 stun hits before he stays down. The Wayland Yutani people don't look like soldiers. That's the unsettling part. They look like technicians. Clean suits, equipment that favors data collection over firepower, the practiced efficiency of a team running a procedure they've rehearsed. The weapons that drop deck are almost incidental, tools among other tools. The real arsenal is everything else. The containment units, the scanning arrays, the sample collectors, the cold bureaucratic confidence of people who process extraordinary things as line items. They find the Kalisk within 11 minutes using the tracking data from Tia's survey files, which Tessa accessed on arrival. That detail, Tessa pulling Thea's own research files and using them against the situation Tia helped create, is one of the movie's quiet devastations. Nothing Tia has done was wrong. Every piece of data she gathered faithfully, professionally, with good intentions, and now it's being used to capture the things she started to understand. The Kalisk doesn't go quietly. The containment footage, shown briefly from a clinical external angle, registers as catastrophic even at a distance. 3 WUY personnel are lost in the process. The rest contain it in a unit designed for something substantially worse, which suggests WUY knew exactly what they were coming to collect and built accordingly. They have Deck cuffed and processed before he's finished assessing his injuries. Tessa finds Tia at the clearing's eastern edge where Deck set her down. The meeting between them is the most quietly charged scene in the film's first two-thirds, and it works precisely because Trachtenberg lets it breathe. No music, no dramatic blocking. Just two identical faces regarding each other across a few meters of alien ground, one of them whole and one of them severed at the thighs, one of them warmly alive in some functional sense and the other running perfectly. "You deleted the transmission log," Tessa says. "Yes, that's a violation of operational protocol." "I know." A pause. Tessa's eyes move across Tia's physical damage with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone assessing repair cost against utility. "The Yautja is being processed. You'll be transported to the facility for repair and debrief." Another pause. "Your emotional architecture has been flagging anomalies since you landed on Jenna." Tia looks at her steadily. "I know that too. It's not a feature," Tessa tells her. "Not cruelly. That would require emotion Tessa doesn't carry, simply as information. A statement of WY's official position on the part of Tia that Tia values most." Tia doesn't argue. She's already understood that argument isn't available here. Tessa wasn't built for persuasion and doesn't experience doubt as a functional state. She's the version of Tia that WUY always wanted, capable, precise, and empty of the inconvenient machinery that makes Tia difficult to deploy. She lets them carry her to the transport, but she's already making calculations of a different kind. The facility sits at Jenna's northern boundary, where the Badlands give way to a rocky plateau and the vegetation thins enough for permanent structure. It's clinical in the way corporate science always is. White surfaces, regulated temperature, the particular smell of recycled air that means you're somewhere designed to be controlled. After Jenna's sensory density, the sterility lands like a kind of violence. Deck is put in a containment cell that was clearly designed for something considerably larger, which either means WY builds with contingency or they've held bigger things before. Both possibilities are troubling. His weapons are removed, cataloged, studied, arrayed on an examination table in an adjacent room with the careful reverence of people who understand their value and feel none of the weight of taking them. The plasmacaster goes to Tessa directly. She examines it with the focused attention she gives everything, turns it over, interfaces with the targeting system, files it under retained assets. What Tessa does to Deck in the following hours is framed carefully by the film. It never tips into the register of straightforward torture because Tessa genuinely isn't interested in causing pain. She's interested in data. The distinction matters, and it also doesn't matter at all, which is sort of the point. She runs biological assessments, stress response measurements, physiological mapping. She's building a profile of the Yautja species, using Deck as the available sample. He endures it with the absolute refusal of a being who has decided that nothing in this facility gets to read anything on his face. Not fear, not pain, not the particular kind of rage that comes from having your weapons taken by something that doesn't understand what weapons mean to the species that made them. His face is a wall. His eyes track Tessa with the patient intensity of someone running their own assessments right back. She notices, files it. "You're mapping the room," she observes during one of the procedures. He doesn't respond. Exit points, personnel positions, equipment that could function as a weapon. A pause. "You've identified 11. You missed 2. Still nothing from him. "I'm not telling you which 2, she clarifies, in case he thought she was offering help. "I'm telling you because accurate data is more useful than comfortable data, and you strike me as someone who prefers accuracy." He looks at her for a long moment, then looks away. But something shifted, barely perceptible. She's right, and he knows it. And being accurately read by something that views him as a research subject is its own specific indignity. Thea is in a repair bay 2 corridors away, which is both a practical decision and a strategic one. Keep them separated. Limit the variables. Tessa understands that whatever dynamic developed between Thea and the Yautja on Jenna represents exactly the kind of operational complication WY's protocols exist to prevent. The repair bay restores Thea's lower body with efficiency, replacement mobility unit, full structural reconnection, system diagnostic complete in 6 hours. She's functional again in ways she hasn't been since the Kalisk's attack. She stands up for the first time in 31 hours, plus however long she spent unconscious during transport, and the experience of standing produces something in her processing that she doesn't have a clean label for. She keeps it. The bay has a single technician assigned to monitor her recovery. He's young, focused on his instruments, not unfriendly but not particularly present either, the kind of person who treats synthetic recovery as a maintenance task rather than an event. She spends the 6 hours being repaired running soft queries through the facility's network. Nothing aggressive, nothing that would trigger security flags, just navigating the available information with the careful thoroughness of someone who understands that you find what you need by knowing which questions look innocent. She finds the Kalisk's containment location. She finds Deck's cell coordinates. She finds Tessa's operational orders. She reads the part about her own deactivation twice. Protocol 7, as it turns out, has a second component she wasn't previously aware of. The first component is Tessa's deployment. The second is the determination that Tia's emotional architecture has produced enough suboptimal outcomes. Her team's data being shared with an unauthorized operative, her transmission log deletion, anomalous behavioral flags to warrant a full reset. Not repair, not adjustment. The wholesale erasure of everything Tia has become since her last initialization. They'll keep her body, replace what's inside it with something more manageable. She sits with that information. She thinks about 31 hours alone on Jenna and what it meant that she kept trying. She thinks about Deck crouching down to her level in a jungle that was trying to kill both of them. She thinks about Bud's amber pigmentation and what it means to be claimed by something that chooses you without any requirement attached to the choice. She thinks about what she'll lose if she lets them take it. She makes her decision in the space between one technician check and the next, not dramatically, no announcement, no visible transformation. She simply calculates that the window available to her is approximately 40 minutes wide, that Deck's cell requires 2 security overrides she has access to, and that if she's going to do something that WY will classify as a catastrophic operational failure, she should do it efficiently. She stands up from the repair bay. Her legs work perfectly. She walks out. 2 security overrides. Thea completes the first one in 11 seconds, the second in 8. Not because the second is easier, it isn't, but because by the time she reaches it, her hands have stopped hesitating. There's a particular quality to action taken after a decision has been fully made, where the body stops waiting for the mind to change course and just moves. She's there. The cell door opens. Deck is already standing at the threshold, which means he heard her coming from at least 30 meters out and spent the intervening time getting ready. He looks at her, at the legs that weren't there before, at the purposeful set of her posture, at whatever readable thing is happening in her face right now, and asks nothing, just steps out. "We have approximately 32 minutes before the next full security cycle," she tells him, moving. "Tessa will know within 90 seconds of the cycle completing. We need Bud, your weapons, and an exit route before that window closes." He falls into step beside her without breaking pace, not behind her, beside her. She notices, files it in a category she stopped pretending is just data. The weapons room has 1 guard, which is 1 more obstacle than Thea was hoping for, and 1 fewer than she planned for. Deck handles it with the clean efficiency of someone who doesn't enjoy this, but doesn't struggle with it either. A single controlled movement, a pressure point, the guard unconscious against the wall with his dignity more or less intact. Deck finds the plasmacaster first. Watching him pick it up is like watching something incomplete become whole. Not a dramatic thing. He doesn't hold it up or take a moment with it. He just shoulders it, runs a 15-second diagnostic, confirms function, and moves to the wrist blades. But there's a quality to his movement afterward that wasn't there in the cell. A settledness. A Yautja without his weapons is a person stripped of vocabulary, and now he can speak again. They move through the facility's service corridors. Tia's network queries from the repair bay have mapped the camera blind spots with enough accuracy to get them to the exterior without triggering anything significant. She talks as they move, partly because the information is necessary and partly because talking keeps her from thinking too hard about what Tessa's space will look like when she finds the empty cell. "They have the Kalisk in the northern containment block," she says. "Alive!" The containment unit is designed to hold something considerably larger, which means WY built this facility expecting something worse. A turn, a duct camera, 12 more meters of corridor. Or they've had experience with something worse. Deck makes a sound that, in the 3 days she spent learning his register, she's cataloged as noted with significant concern. Bud is outside. This is the thing about Bud that the film establishes quietly and then pays off repeatedly. It doesn't follow rules it didn't agree to. The WY team processed everything in that clearing. Deck, the Kalisk, the equipment, and somewhere in the logistics of capture and transport, Bud simply didn't appear in anyone's manifest. Not because they missed it, because Bud decided not to be found. And on Jenna, if a native species decides not to be found, a team of corporate technicians with scanning equipment stands no realistic chance. It's waiting at the facility's eastern exterior wall, amber pigmentation cycling in the dark with the patient warmth of something that has been sitting here since they arrived and expected this exact reunion at roughly this exact time. Deck crouches down to it. Bud leans its head against his chest plate. That resonant sound, low and slow. Thea watches them and feels the particular ache of a moment that is simultaneously small and enormous. Two creatures from entirely different contexts, one of them built by evolution and one by corporate engineering, finding something they recognize in each other on an alien planet that's been trying to kill them since they arrived. Then Bud makes a different sound. Higher! Urgent! And turns toward the facility's northern wall. This is where the story shifts its weight. Tia follows Bud's direction on her scanner, reads the biological signal the creature is orienting toward, pulls the frequency against her archived data from the Kalisk encounter, cross-checks it against the WUY containment manifests she pulled from the network. She stops walking. Deck. Something in her voice makes him turn fully to face her. Not the navigational tone she uses when she's feeding him terrain data. Something slower, more careful. The signal in that containment block. She pulls up the frequency on her scanner, extends it toward him. Compare it to Bud. He looks at the readout, looks at Bud, looks back at the readout. They're related, she says. The biological markers are parent offspring. Bud is. She rechecks the data one more time because she wants to be sure, because what she's about to say will change everything. Bud is the Kalisk's child. The word lands in the space between them and keeps expanding. Sit with what that means for a second. Deck arrived on Jenna with a mission. Kill the Kalisk, the unkillable creature, the ultimate trophy. The kill that would redeem his exile, honor Quay's sacrifice, prove something to a father who ordered his death. Every piece of this story has been building toward that confrontation, and the confrontation happened in that clearing, and Deck lost it completely, and the Kalisk spared him. Spared him because of Bud. Because Bud's scent was on him. Because, to the Kalisk, something carrying its child's claim was not prey, was something else entirely, something outside the vocabulary of hunting. And now Bud is standing at the eastern wall of a WY facility, emitting an urgent biological frequency directed at a containment block where its parent is being held by corporate interests who don't understand what they have, who think they have a specimen, who think the most dangerous thing about the Kalisk is its physical capability. They don't understand it has a family. They don't understand that what they did, taking it from Jenna, isn't just capture. It's something with a weight the Yautja have a name for, the violation that demands answer, and the Kalisk, contained and alive in that facility, has been waiting. Thea watches Deck process all of this in real time, and what she sees is not the thing she would have predicted a week ago. She would have predicted conflict. The hunter's code straining against the revelation, the mission wrestling with the new information, the internal calculation of what the mission was worth if the target turns out to be a parent protecting its young. What she sees instead is something simpler and harder. Relief. Not the relief of an exit. Not, oh good, I don't have to fight it again. The relief of alignment. Of the world finally making sense in a way that his code, for all its centuries of refinement, never quite managed to provide. The Kalisk didn't spare him out of indifference or error. It read the situation accurately and made the right choice. On a planet full of things that operate on pure survival logic, the apex creature, the one no Yautja has ever beaten, chose not to kill something that carried its child's mark. That's not weakness. That's exactly what the Yautja Code claims to value: precision, appropriate response, the right action in the right context. His father would have killed it anyway, would have called the sparing a flaw, a vulnerability to be exploited, and Jor's version of strength requires that nothing be allowed to choose mercy, because mercy, in his framework, is just weakness wearing a different name. Dek thinks about Quay. He looks at Bud. The hunt becomes a rescue, Thea says quietly, not a directive, an observation. She's been watching the calculation play out on his face, or what passes for his face behind the biohelmet, and she's arrived at the conclusion before he's finished building it. He looks at her. You didn't come here to free it, she continues, but that doesn't mean it's not the right move. WY will study it until it's no longer useful, and then they'll decide what useful means for a regenerating apex predator from a hostile planet, and I think we both know that calculation ends badly. A pause. For everyone. He's already looking at the northern wall. I can get us into the containment block, she says. The override architecture is the same as yours. Different credentials, but I've had access to Tessa's login protocol since we were initialized together, and she never thought to revoke them because she never thought I'd use them. A small, precise pause. She underestimated the emotional architecture. Something in his posture shifts, barely visible, but she catches it, something adjacent to appreciation. In Yautja body language, the weight shift is almost imperceptible. Almost. They're 30 meters from the containment block entrance when every light in the facility switches from white to red. Tessa's voice comes over the facility's communication system with the calm of something that was never startled to begin with. Tia. A pause precisely long enough to feel deliberate. I've accounted for what you do. I've accounted for why. I want you to know that before you continue. Tia doesn't stop walking. I know, she says to the air. Account for this too. She hits the override. The containment block door opens. From inside comes a sound. Deep, resonant, biological, that Dek recognizes from a clearing on Jenna where the ecosystem pulled back and the earth was scored with 3-meter gouges and a creature stood over him and chose. Bud runs forward, pigmentation blazing full warm amber, and disappears into the dark of the containment block ahead of all of them. The containment block smells like Jenna. Not the recycled facility air, not the polymer and coolant smell of corporate science doing its work. Actual Jenna. The layered biological density of a planet that never stops producing life, carried in on the Kalisk the way scent carries home on someone who's been traveling. The unit that held it is enormous, scarred on its interior walls in patterns that tell a story about what the Kalisk spent its captivity doing, testing every surface, mapping every weakness, waiting. Bud disappears into the dark of the block, and the amber of its pigmentation is the only light for a moment, warm, pulsing, urgent. Then the sound from deeper in the dark, that resonant biological call, the one Dek felt in his chest in the clearing on Jenna. But different now. Lower, older, a parent's version of the same frequency. Bud answers. The reunion between them lasts approximately 8 seconds, which in the context of what follows is both very short and exactly long enough. The Kalisk moves out of the containment unit with the particular economy of something that has been in a confined space for too long and knows precisely what it wants to do about that. It stops when it reaches Dek. They regard each other, Dek, and the creature that defeated him completely, that regenerated from decapitation, that stood over him in a clearing and made a choice. His entire upbringing told him apex predators don't make. Up close, in the cold blue light of the facility corridor, the intelligence in the Kalisk's regard is even harder to dismiss. It reads him the way a person reads a face, not scanning for threat data, reading, recognizing. It registers the scent. Bud's claim, still present on his armor, it steps aside, not submission, not alliance exactly, something closer to acknowledgement. You are connected to what I value, therefore you are not what I hunt. The logic is clean and ancient and takes exactly no account of Yautja codes or corporate protocols or any of the structures that got everyone in this corridor into their current situation. Tia exhales. Okay, she says, for the second time in this film, doing the same work with the word as she did the first time. Except this okay carries more in it. It carries the weight of a plan that has just become viable and a situation that has just become considerably more dangerous, and a choice she made in a repair bay that she'd make again without hesitation. "We need to move," she says. "Tessa is—" The facility's northern wall comes apart. The Kalisk doesn't wait for anyone's tactical plan. 3 years. Or whatever the Jenna equivalent of 3 years is, however long it spent in that unit before WY transported it here, of testing walls that didn't give. And now, a wall gives. The structural logic of the facility wasn't built for something that regenerates from decapitation and has been cataloging stress points since its first hour of captivity. The north wall goes, and then the one after it, and the Kalisk moves through the facility's interior in a direction that isn't toward freedom so much as through everything between it and freedom. WY's personnel respond with the professional composure of people running a protocol, which lasts about 90 seconds before the composure finds its limit. Dek and Tia go the other way. Here's where the film does something genuinely smart. Tessa has the plasmacaster, Dek's primary weapon, the one that dropped the Kalisk twice in the clearing, the one that makes a Yautja hunter into something even an apex predator has to respect, is in Tessa's possession, mounted on a shoulder rig she's modified to interface with her synthetic targeting system. She's effectively turned his most powerful tool against the situation he's created. So Dek goes back to Jenna. Not literally, he can't, not yet. But the root systems that border the facility's eastern exterior, the reactive flora that spills through a structural crack in the lower wall, the biological material of a planet that grows over everything given half an opportunity, all of that is Jenna pushing through the facility's edges. And Dek, who spent days learning to read Jenna's logic, who took one hit from a lashing plant and spent the next 3 hours adapting to never take another, who watched Bud navigate its home ecosystem with a fluency he studied and absorbed. Dek knows what this planet produces. He starts building. Thea watches him work and understands, with the particular clarity of a mind built for observation, that she is watching something unprecedented. A Yautja hunter, stripped of technology, reaching into an alien planet's biology and constructing weapons from what's available. The reactive flora's lashing mechanism, redirected and mounted. Dense root material shaped into impact weapons with an edge, his wrist blade carves in 30 seconds. A compound harvested from the same plant species that hit him on day 1, processed through a technique he figured out from watching Bud interact with the local ecology, rendered into something that, when applied to a strike surface, produces a result that falls in the neighborhood of catastrophic. He's working from memory, instinct, and 3 days of paying attention on a planet most beings never survive long enough to understand. "How long have you been planning this?" Tia asks. He doesn't answer. But the rhythm of his hand says, "Since they took my weapons." They hit the facility's main floor from the service level, Dek dropping through a ceiling access point with the organic arsenal across his back, and Bud landing beside him with the casual impact of something that has jumped off higher things. Thea takes a parallel route through the network. She's locked Tessa out of 3 of the facility's 7 operational systems, which won't hold but will slow the response pattern enough to matter. The synthetic security personnel move in formation. Clean, precise, running on the same cold logic as Tessa. Obstacles identified, optimal response calculated, emotion not a variable. Dek is a variable they haven't calculated for. The fight through the facility floor is the movie's action centerpiece, and it earns every second of its runtime. Not because of scale, though the scale is significant, but because of what it represents. This is Dek fighting without the apparatus of Yautja identity. No clan honor, no trophy logic, no performance for an absent father. He's fighting for something he chose, in the way he wants to fight it, with tools he made from materials the universe handed him and he paid attention to. The lashing weapon clears the first corridor. The root impact tool handles the second. Bud, it turns out, has combat applications nobody bothered to study because nobody who encountered Bud in a combat context survived to file a report. It moves through the synthetic personnel with a decisive efficiency that Tia is quietly cataloging for reasons she'll examine later. They reach the Kalisk's path of destruction and follow it outward. Tessa is waiting in the facility's central atrium. She's in the power loader. This is the film's visual signature moment, the image you'd put on a poster, the frame that ends up in every review thumbnail. a Wayland-Yutani synthetic in an industrial exosuit built for heavy equipment operations, repurposed by someone who never does anything without full preparation, with Deck's own plasmacaster mounted on the loader's primary arm and its targeting system synced to Tessa's visual processing at a level of integration that makes it effectively a natural extension of her body. She looks like a corporate god, enormous, precise, unhurried. Behind her, through the atrium's blown exterior wall, Genna's Badlands stretch out in the late daylight. The planet just continues, as it always does, entirely indifferent to what's happening at its edge. Tessa doesn't monologue. She's not built for it, and Trachtenberg is too smart to hand the film's primary antagonist a speech at its climax. She simply raises the loader's primary arm, locks the plasmacaster onto Deck with targeting accuracy that his own use of the weapon never quite achieved, and prepares to end the operational complication. Then the Kalisk comes through the west wall. What follows is not a fight. Deck wins. Be honest about this. Deck doesn't beat Tessa in the climax of Predator Badlands, he survives it, and there's a distinction. Kalisk, moving through the facility toward its young, toward Bud, toward the outside air of its home planet, encounters the thing standing between it and that destination, and the Kalisk's response is what you'd expect from a creature that just spent captivity testing walls. Tessa is extraordinary. Full credit where it's due. Watching her in the power loader is watching something engineered for performance operating at its ceiling. She takes the Kalisk's first charge with the loader braced, the plasmacaster firing at contact range, and she holds. She's fast in the loader in a way the machine wasn't designed for, using the synthetic nervous system's processing speed to push the exosuit beyond its engineering tolerances, and for a sustained 3-minute sequence, she and the Kalisk are genuinely matched. The Kalisk regenerates. She accounts for that, switches from direct damage to structural interference, using the loader's weight to pin and constrain rather than wound. The plasmacaster fires ice compound rounds that Tessa has preloaded from WY's containment arsenal, and where the plasma shots bounce off regenerating carapace, the ice rounds slow the biological repair process. She's adapted her approach in real time. She's brilliant, in the terrible, purposeless way that brilliance without warmth always is. And then the Kalisk does the thing that nothing in Tessa's modeling accounted for. It swallows her. Not a desperate move, not a last resort, considered tactical response from a creature that has been on Jenna longer than WY has been a company, that has survived everything its planet produces, that looked at the problem of an opponent too fast to consistently damage from the outside, and arrived at a solution that is, in its own way, elegant. The power loader disappears into the Kalisk's mass. The atrium goes very quiet. Tia grabs Deck's arm. Then Tessa, from inside, detonates every ice compound round remaining in the plasmacaster simultaneously. The sound is enormous and wrong. Not an explosion exactly, more like a system failing all at once, biological and mechanical at the same frequency. The Kalisk staggers. Its regenerative processes, taxed beyond their operating capacity by the sheer volume and internal placement of the ice compound, fail to keep pace. It goes down. The enormous body hits the atrium floor, and the impact travels through the building's structure, through the ground, out into Jenna. Silence. Bud makes a sound that Deck has never heard from it before. Short, low, final. Tessa walks out. Damaged, the power loader gone, her chassis compromised in several places, her movement carrying the quality of something running on reduced capacity. But walking, Tessa doesn't stop running until she's switched off, and nobody has switched her off yet. She surveys the atrium, the Kalisk, Deck, Thea, Bud. She runs a calculation, identifies the highest remaining operational priority. She takes a step toward Tia. Deck moves between them. Tessa's damaged targeting system locks onto him. One functional arm raises. Whatever remains of the plasmacaster's charge is in there. Not much, but enough at this range. Step aside, she says. The calm is intact. The calm will always be intact, because the calm isn't a choice. It's just the absence of everything that makes a choice possible. Deck doesn't step aside. What he does instead is something that takes Tessa's processing system a full 2 seconds to categorize, which is an eternity for something running at her speed. He moves not against her, but around her. A specific lateral pattern, a weight distribution, an angle of approach that she recognizes at the last moment because she has WY's full database of Yautja behavioral observation, and this particular movement pattern appears exactly once in those records. It's Njor's technique, the one Njor used to kill Quay. Dek learned it in the same place Quay did, growing up in a household where a specific kind of power expressed itself through a specific kind of movement, and if you wanted to survive, you paid attention. He's never used it. He's never had reason to, and there was something in him that refused to carry his father's cruelty as a tool. Until now. Elsa's damage system doesn't account for it fast enough. His hand finds the back of her head, the precise point of synthetic cranial architecture where the primary processing cluster sits unprotected, and the wrist blade does the rest. Tessa goes still. Permanent still, the kind that doesn't regenerate, that no override can correct, that WY's technical teams will spend a long time examining and ultimately file as unrecoverable loss. She stands for a moment before gravity takes over, in the way things do when the thing keeping them upright has simply stopped. Then she falls. And the atrium holds the silence that comes after something enormous has ended. The journey back to the clan takes time the film handles in compressed images. Jenna receding behind them, Bud settled against Dek's side during travel, Tia watching him from across whatever space serves as the ship's cabin. She doesn't push him to process out loud. She's learned, over the course of everything, that Dek communicates through what he does rather than what he says, and what he does during the journey is sit with the weight of what he's carrying. Tessa's head. Severed. In a containment unit. He's bringing it to his father. The Yautja clan receives him with the particular silence of people who expected the return of a corpse and are processing something different. Njor watches him walk through the clan's gathering space. Toward him, not stopping, direct in the way Dek has always been direct, which Njor always read as insolence and is only now beginning to understand is something else entirely. Dek puts Tessa's head at Njor's feet, the kill that ended the mission that was a death sentence, brought back complete. Njor looks at it, looks at Dek, and makes the mistake that has defined him throughout this film. He reaches for the same response that has always worked, the weight of authority, the casual cruelty of someone who has never once been genuinely challenged by the person he spent years diminishing. He dismisses him. After all of it, the sacrifice, the exile, Quay's death, the Kalisk, the regeneration, Jenna, everything Dek survived and did and became. Najar looks at it and finds a way to make it insufficient. Because that's who Njar is, because a father who can be proven wrong by his son's survival will find reasons why the survival doesn't count. This is the moment that breaks something and fixes something simultaneously. Dek looks at his father and uses Njor's own technique on him, the same weight, the same angles, the same precise application of force that Njor used to kill Quay, disarming him fully. Standing over him the way Njor has stood over everyone in his life who showed any softness, any deviation from the code he uses as a hammer. Bud walks forward and completes it. No ceremony. The amber pigmentation steady and warm and untroubled. After, the three of them stand at the edge of the clan's territory, in the particular stillness that follows the end of something that took a long time to reach its end. The clan behind them, Jenna somewhere below doing what Jenna does, Bud between them, warm and present. Tia looks at the horizon. Now what? She asks. And then the ship appears. Massive. Larger than anything in the Yautja fleet Dek has knowledge of. Larger than anything in WY's inventory, moving with the unhurried certainty of something that decided its destination long before it arrived. It fills the horizon like a second sky, lit from within by systems that don't match any technology currently cataloged, and it stops. Not landing, not passing through, just stops and waits. The film doesn't explain it. Of course it doesn't. This is the beginning of the next question, not the answer to the one we just spent 2 hours inside. And that's exactly correct, because the story that just finished was complete. It had its beginning in Quay's sacrifice and its end in Bud's amber light, and everything in between was exactly as long as it needed to be. What comes next is something else entirely. Dek looks at the ship. Tia looks at Dek. Bud makes the resonant chest sound, slow, steady, unworried. But this movie is really doing. Here's my honest read on Predator Badlands, now that we've walked through the whole thing. Dan Trachtenberg made Prey to prove the franchise could survive without its original formula. He made Badlands to prove it could evolve past even the new formula Prey established. Because Prey was still fundamentally a human story. Naru's journey, her intelligence against the Predator's power, the audience positioned with the underdog. Badlands strips that comfort away entirely. There's no human surrogate. The being you spend the film rooting for has mandibles and a thermal vision display and was raised inside a culture that ordered his execution. And you root for him completely. from minute 2. That's the trick, and it works because the film never asks you to forget what deck is. It asks you to understand that what deck is and who deck is are different questions, and the Yautja Code conflates them deliberately. Because a system that needs to justify why some lives matter less than others always benefits from making identity and value synonymous. Anjor isn't a villain the way movie villains usually work, he's a worldview. He's what happens when strength determines worth, gets institutionalized and passed down and never questioned, because questioning it requires the kind of emotional architecture the system actively suppresses. He didn't become cruel. He was built by a culture that handed cruelty a trophy and called it honor. Thea is the counter-argument, a synthetic given emotional capabilities her manufacturer didn't fully intend, and those capabilities are consistently framed as her greatest feature rather than her flaw. Every decision she makes that WY classifies as suboptimal is a decision that produces something real, connection, trust, the kind of loyalty that gets a door opened at the right moment. That is what Thea would be without that architecture. And Tessa is brilliant, effective, and completely empty. The film asks, what's the point of precision without care? What does strength actually mean if it only ever turns inward and destroys what it was supposed to protect? Quay answers that question in the opening 5 minutes, and the movie spends its remaining runtime following the ripple. The honest take Predator, Badlands is not a perfect film. The pacing in its middle section, specifically the facility sequences before Tia's breakout, occasionally trades momentum for atmosphere in ways that not every viewer will have patience for. The Kalisk, for all its remarkable design and conceptual weight, remains partially unexplained in ways that feel less like deliberate mystery and more like story threads parked for a sequel. And the final ship on the horizon, while visually stunning, is the kind of ending that works if a sequel arrives within a reasonable time frame and falls somewhat flat if it doesn't. But here's what it gets so right that the limitations stop mattering. It trusts its audience. It commits to a protagonist who communicates almost entirely through behavior and lets that be enough. It gives Elle Fanning 2 characters to play, and she finds completely distinct people in the same face. It takes the Predator franchise, a series built on the simple, satisfying pleasure of watching something terrifying get beaten, and asks what would happen if we cared about the something terrifying. And the answer it arrives at is not a twist or a subversion or a clever deconstruction. It's just a story about an outcast, a broken android, and a creature that chose mercy, trying to find their way through a universe that mostly doesn't have room for any of them. That's old. That's ancient, actually. Wrapped in sci-fi and mandibles and regenerating biology, but ancient. And when Bud leans against Deck's chest plate one final time with that amber warmth cycling steady, you feel it the way you feel things that are old and true. Not because the film told you to, because it earned it part by part, scene by scene, across every quiet moment it chose over spectacle. If this deep dive hit right, if you found yourself actually caring about a Predator's arc, which frankly I didn't fully expect going in, hit like and consider subscribing. New breakdowns dropping regularly, and I put as much into each one as this. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Deck should free the next Kalisk, or did he just make the most dangerous mistake in franchise history? Because I genuinely don't know the answer, and I want to hear where you land. Until the next one, take care of each other out there. Bud would want that.